ultimately, connectivity as a service is providing the entire end-to-end technology that a business uses to connect to the internet and provide it as a monthly subscription service.
CTIO 101, Business Technology, Simplified and Shared, sponsored by Fairmont Recruitment, hiring technology professionals across the UK and Europe. Don't forget to subscribe.
So, Andy, we're going to do connecting as a service, and it might be worth exploring a little bit as we go through that. I don't want to use the word traditional, but the sort of some of the areas of technology that a CIO is very familiar with, it has remained the same for quite a few years. So I think this is, we hear the word disruption a lot. It gets banded around a bit like digital.
Very much a buzzword.
But I see this as something that is really offering a big change.
Ultimately, connectivity as a service is providing the entire end-to-end technology that a business uses to connect to the internet and provide it as a monthly subscription service. So that is the fundamental of that product, right? And I think there's two kind of key areas that you call out from that. There's obviously what does that actually mean in principle? If you think about a corporate user on site to connect to the internet or cloud application or whatever it will be, it's WAN, LAN, Wi-Fi, security. In a nutshell, there's four key technology areas there. This just takes all of those services from one supplier and delivers it as a subscription per user per month service. So very akin to your cloud consumption model type offering. That's kind of the first kind of layer of that, if you want to call it that. The kind of second layer on top of that is because of the standardization of that deployment, i.e. one supplier who delivers end-to-end that entire tech stack in a really standardized way. There is software orchestration on top of that essentially means it reduces the overhead and management burden on the consumer. So if you think about that in today's world, and this is kind of the as a service and the disruption piece that you want to talk about. If you think about the journey of as a service, AWS, Azure, IaaS, took it from on-site into the cloud. You got the same with software as a service, and connectivity as a service is a very, very similar principle. And when we talk about disruption, obviously, if you think about the way it's done today, it's still very much siloed.
Andy, I was just thinking, so the episode that is live now on the channel is cloud strategy. Ben describes 10 platforms as the sort of, if you look at a business, it's got 10, and this is definitely one of them. In fact, going connectivity as a service, you may have actually moved two into one. So the point is this could be part of your platform strategy. So there's going to be a lot of cloud strategy considerations for connectivity as a service. Because it's more of the as a service business case risks. The sort of control and what's the resilience and all the rest of it. And then the answer that consistently comes back is, well, actually, you're using someone who's got scale. So they're always going to be better than you doing it yourself. And that's your patching and your resilience. And, well, hang on a minute, Andy, I don't want to have all of this going through one supplier. Maybe, isn't that me relying too much on you? And you might say, well, yeah, but you only have one supplier for Teams. You only have one supplier for cloud. You've got is that kind of the space of the sort of the initial discussion that you have?
Yeah, I think so. But I think there is, as I kind of mentioned, there is a mindset. If we're talking about the types of customers that we see adopt connectivity as a service, there is a mindset and a commonality within those organizations, right? So have you ever heard the phrase, making your own electricity won't make your beer taste better? Have you heard that phrase before?
I haven't.
Okay.
I haven't,
so
but that's brilliant.
I won't say that I have, coined that phrase out, but I'll tell you kind of the story and where that comes from.
Andy, before you do, can I just say how interested I am in that statement? Because I brew my own beer, and my whole career is based off of the magic of electricity. So I'm really intrigued. Go on.
It helps set the scene as all as a service models is basically where we're going, and essentially the story behind that is 19th century brewers. So obviously way back when, this was before there was a national grid. A lot of brewers used to make their own electricity, and there is a story that obviously those who first adopted a stable national grid for electricity soon flourished above the competitors that made their own. And the reality was those brewers were wasting internal resource and time and cost on something that actually didn't make their end product taste better or their customers enjoy it. And actually the launch of that, this is actually a phrase that Jeff Bezos used in the very, very early days of AWS. So an as a service kind of mentality. And that is so similar to the conversations that, from a connectivity as a service, you have to see and make a decision as a business. Is spending internal time or resource on this going to have a beneficial outcome as opposed to outsourcing it?
I would imagine, apart from kind of wind farms and solar, so topping up on their electricity, most brewers have now made that leap. So we're not in the business of making electricity. Yeah, right. We're in the business of making beer, or it's the phrase I use in the podcast is it's the thing we've decided to be famous for.
We're talking to organisations, and I see it in the general market and discussions for connectivity as a service, where a customer will have procured the WAN from someone, 3-year, 5-year contracts, managed service, got a couple of guys internally to manage it, got technical account managers on the other side, professional services, adds, moves, changes, all this kind of stuff. The LAN equipment they're then going buying themselves, they're setting up, they're managing themselves. They might have another MSP to call on for that. The Wi-Fi exactly the same, and before you know it, across 4 or 5 areas, and this could be one site or 100 sites, you are increasing your management overhead across the delivery of that service because you just piece it together.
And Andy, what's not visible to the board or to the non-business technologist is that actually 9 times out of 10, the consequence of that is your kit goes out of date. It doesn't get patched as much as it should. That can give you security vulnerabilities or just connectivity problems. They walk into an office and you can't connect because the certificate's not up to date, or all these things that it's like this sort of you've invested in this amazing theme park, and on day one it is incredible, but within a year things just don't quite work because there's all this sort of maintenance. It's a really strong theme that comes out in the cloud strategy as well, which is just all these different components require so much feeding and watering, updating, keeping ready. So it's really difficult to scale on your own, isn't it?
Yeah, and if you think about the experience for the organisation and the consumer, if you want to call that, as the staff on site, no one is internally going around high-fiving each other on the quality of your Wi-Fi or the fact that you've got SD-WAN. They open the laptop, they connect, that's all they care about, right? So, we fundamentally, it's kind of, why would you layer on so much resource and technology and multi-silo, vendor management for what is essentially, I come in on, I connect and I'm off we go.
Totally agree, Andy. On our transformation episode, we were talking about those elements. I mean, there's this guy called Maslow, 1950s,
hierarchy of needs.
Who did the hierarchy of needs, and underneath right at the bottom someone put Wi-Fi, and it's that that sort of squeaky door. You go in somewhere you haven't got Wi-Fi, you're just going, well, hang on, what sort of place is this? But if you've got it, you just don't blink. You're absolutely right, and it's just expected to be correct and working. And no board is going to spend an hour talking on, unless it's not working, on how great the Wi-Fi provision is.
I mean, it's a commodity. It's not sexy. It's not decent technology anymore for an organisation. It is a commodity in the sense. Back to the kind of electricity analogy with that, and I think connectivity as a service really doubles down on that mentality. It's not, and that really comes through, and we'll dive onto the whole how someone progresses it and the things they think about and all that kind of stuff. But this is a service that gets out of the minutiae of the detail. You're not talking bandwidths, you're not talking speeds, ups and downs, access point, location. You're just talking about an outcome, very much akin to the as a service model.
If I'm putting a business case together, the sort of elements that I might want to draw in, so we can sort of, folks that are listening to this thinking, okay, this is sounding interesting, but what are the sort of business case elements? So I want to just run a couple of things past you. One would be where we wouldn't use it. So this is what I've imagined researching. So you correct me, or we can debate it. But basically, you've got any organization, and you're trying to provide your day-to-day connectivity. This really sits really right in the middle of the target for that sort of thing. However, if I'm a company and I use my data center networking connectivity to provide real-time, there's no such thing as real-time, but you know what I mean, real-time as best as you can, I don't know, data feeds to the financial services markets, and milliseconds really count there in terms of updating and all the rest of it. And actually, that is part of what I'm famous for. In other words, it's core revenue. Would you say that connectivity as service is mature enough to take on that kind of connectivity? So literally, I'm giving you the keys to all my connectivity, Andy. Or would you say, well, actually, where it's at, it's a bit like, I suppose the analogy would be, you're using a famous stack from a cloud provider for all your word processing, yeah? But you still might have something very bespoke that's still technology based. And some companies, that how fast they can do their network is actually very material to their results. Does that make sense? Do you see where I'm coming from?
Yeah, so I think if I was to think about the types of, the types of organisations who I can see wouldn't, not adopting this technology, I don't think it's necessarily as much use case as it is emotive and kind of where they are as a business. So what I mean by that is, connectivity as a service fundamentally is underpinned by enterprise level services. So, if you think about that, enterprise level WAN, the latest kit across LAN, Wi-Fi, up-to-date security, etc. But really, what this does is, as a mindset, is it completely changes the way an organisation looks at connectivity. So, for example, if I was to think about an organisation that wouldn't want to adopt this, if there's a CTO, for example, who has a team of 60 people in IT, 15 people managing a network, and and someone's coming along from a connectivity as a service and saying, this can, streamline the whole operation, and by the way, it'll do 70% of your day-to-day network management tasks. There is a decision to be made at that point, which is, what I've already invested in, is that now kind of, do I have to go to someone and say, I know we sunk £2 million in kit, and I know we did this,
so
and I know we've...
Where are you on that business case? Because if you're a year in, it's awkward. If you're year 9 of 10 years, it's like, okay, well, this is what we're going to do next. So where they are in the cycle.
So it's an infrastructure piece, but it's a people piece. This is very much focused around people. So if you think about the scenarios that we've seen, I'm seeing organisations adopt connectivity as a service because they've got multiple 10, 15, 20 sites, and they've got 3 people in IT, and all day every day they spent firefighting, and they just need this off the plate. You can really see the use case for that there. Similarly, we've seen,
Andy, sorry, on that one, I think you're absolutely right. That's where you're really playing more of a scarcity element, because, network engineering skills aren't plentiful. Those 3 individuals that are in that team, I bet you a few quid, they've got a backlog of other stuff they just can never get to. So there is a bit of in that scenario, there's a little bit of an automation kind of work shift. It's, you're getting a lot of benefits out of being up to date, and it's not so much on the labor side. So there is that. One other one quickly, Andy, was if you take cloud adoption, there's a couple of areas that kind of hit the buffers pretty quick, and now I think have kind of matured to the point where they are being used. So governments weren't very keen on cloud, and military weren't very keen on cloud for really obvious reasons, because it's like, well, where on earth is all this kit, Andy, that you've got our stuff on? But the way the big players resolved it is they sort of said, well, we're going to create dedicated enterprise architecture for government, based, in the geography that you want it in. So connectivity as a service, is it anywhere near that, or do you think governments would be still, a little bit reticent? I'm thinking public sector.
I think, if you think about this this proposition as a technology, it's 2 years old. Probably, if you think about where it's at the minute, is that considered too bleeding edge for certain organisations, particularly in public sector? I've personally seen certain elements of public sector housing trusts, for example, adopt CaaS, I think, as we all know, there is a bureaucracy and red tape anyway within the public sector space that very much differs from the private sector, which, I think the use case is there, though. There's absolutely fundamentally a use case of...
I agree, Andy. I think there is a use case there, and I think what you should look at, what everyone should think about watching this, but given that it's only 2 years old, is that one of the things that was rolled out early on was, we're really worried about security.
Yeah.
But the argument was only one-sided. It was only looking at the security of the cloud provision. There was no kind of really careful look at what current security was like. When you can't patch everything, when you basically the service you're providing is outgrown, your ability to support it, that's not a great situation to be in either.
We've got to think about the technology that we're talking about. This is essentially a commoditized service, right? This is the double down nature of connectivity as a service. In that sense of it's more around trying to standardize and simplify this solution than kind of layer on levels of technical complexity. So, a prime example of this, if you think about it in today's space, is kind of organizations looking at connectivity as a service versus looking at something like SD-WAN. They're looking at SD-WAN because SD-WAN is the buzzword thrown about, and there's a load of benefits and use cases, and they might have a team and skill set of 6, 7, 8 people internally who just want to play with the toys and get on with it, and that's okay for them. But they're not. What they're not doing is seeing connectivity as connectivity talks about it, which is basically connectivity service can do all of those things, but it's going to mean you're going to relinquish a little bit of control on that, and actually you're not going to be spending resources on that.
But Andy, don't you think looking at software-defined networks as being really one of the big enablers for what you're providing?
Yeah.
When I looked at it, I thought this is incredible. This is really cool. It is definitely a very, very powerful move forwards, but there's still a huge amount of skill and responsibility and thought that needs to go into how you define your network. And if your network is now software defined, you're just opening up, if you're not careful, another really rich seam of legacy debt and misconfiguration and
problems, all
sorts of problems that you might have. So I have a sort of a similar view to what they call low code. If you look at low code, it's not really something that our mythical 5-year-old could use or a business user could use without having any knowledge. You still got to know how to craft an application. You've still got to understand your business processes and everything else. So for SD-WAN, I would have thought that is something that is more of an enabler for your technology. But in this case, you remember we talked about that. You mentioned the guy or girl who's in year 2 of their business case and they've got a big networking team.
Yeah.
Do you come across sort of TUPE considerations and outsourcing? Do you have an approach that says, well, actually, we will take some of your people in, or we can't talk about specifics, obviously, but can TUPE apply in some cases?
I wouldn't necessarily say TUPE, but I think one of the conversations that we see come up a lot is kind of retraining and skill sets. So as an example, and this is if you think about the kind of second fundamental benefit of CaaS I talked about was the software that sits on top of it, which is not software in a sense of SD-WAN. It's software that monitors and manages the whole tech stack and connectivity service as a whole, which reduces the management overheads on organizations. So by default, CaaS will reduce the internal capacity and resource needed on the IT team to manage the end-to-end service, particularly compared to if that service previously was multi-silo, multi-vendor, multi-contract refresh, all that kind of stuff. In the instances that we've seen, there have been some, in some examples, it's not a huge consideration because you've got a team that is just under-resourced, right? So, let's think about, network engineer, 35, 40, 45 grand probably. You'll probably know better than me. A year at the moment. You talked about skill shortages. We talked about, this is just generally, never mind in IT. I think network engineers were something like the second most desirable IT role, as in what was, people were looking for in today's market behind developers, just because it's, less and less people are training in that, or they're moving towards the technology that seems to be more of a, an attractive and can really springboard a career. So if you're talking about an internal cost of 40, 45k, 50k when it's fully loaded, PAYE, etc., you're kind of looking at that and saying, what's my total cost of ownership here versus doing that? Or can I get that person, and this isn't going to replace their role, but it's going to free up their capacity to do X, Y, and Z. And that is the fundamental outcome that we see with CaaS. It's kind of not I'm going to take these 3 or 4 people out of the business. It's now, what can I do with this resource? Or if it's an FD or it's CTO or CIO, how does this impact my budget more widely? And what can I do? But the TCO piece is massively important.
It's just one of those areas which you very rarely question the number of people that you need in your network space, particularly if it's a global network, and you've got lots of private lines dotted around various data centers in the world. It becomes you do get this sense that you're sort of trying to be a telecoms provider, but never ever tipping the scale of skill and number of engineers to actually do it.
But if you think about total cost of ownership as an overall here, I think what we see day in, day out when it comes to connectivity as a service is obviously there's a really simple, clear pricing commercial model on CaaS that could not be more simple for an organisation to adopt, and I'm sure we'll dive into that. When you're looking at that as an overall service versus almost, well, what have I got today? It's very simple to say, well, okay, what's my annual cost of my WAN? What do I spend yearly on budget for CapEx for kit refresh? You add those 3 or 4 things together and you say, well, actually, that's what I pay here, that's what I pay here. But it's everything else on top of that that's not hidden. It's as I said, the time taken of a 45 grand engineer. It's the the downtime. It's the inflexibility around the purchasing decisions that you've made contractually. It's early cancellation charges. It's a whole myriad of stuff.
Load balancing. It's all the software configuration. It's the updates that then lead to potentially quite interesting. Understand. So just a couple of points. So if I go for it, what on security, particularly things like ransomware or this sort of really significant events, what's going to assure me? I mean, obviously, don't give away anything that we shouldn't discuss publicly. But what's going to assure me that actually, Andy, going with you, you're not going to ring me up and say, "Sorry, John, we're completely out." This is this sort of, I'm in charge of my own network, my own destiny, versus handing over to you. What sort of what's the discussion there that convinces the CIO, CTO, or head of networking that actually this sounds like it's got legs?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if you think about security within connectivity as a service, it kind of comes back to what I mentioned earlier around how this is actually underpinned as an enterprise service. Yeah, so I think if you, in the same way, an organisation may go out today and procure a WAN and security is provided on the perimeter as part of that with the supplier. There is no difference with this with connectivity as a service. It's still very much a commercial model plus a software management wrap that sits on top of what are essentially traditional connectivity services. So I think, if anything, from a security perspective, because of the way that CaaS is delivered and the fact that all of this is effectively API into vendors, software patching, updates, firewall, all these things are always constantly updated by the supplier, so the supplier of CaaS. And it's not like you've got, on site where firmware is expired or on the latest version or the wrong version. All of this is actually done on behalf, almost just like a managed service. So like what a lot of MSPs would do, but it's going that layer above with the fact that the self-serve through the software and ultimately the end-to-end management piece of that. I think obviously there's always organisations that go deeper, and we see it today where, we see customers taking connectivity as a service and they're still adding their own firewall solutions on top of that if that's due to certain protocols or procedures within their business. So, I would say whilst the service as itself is still 2 years old, all the technology that sits underneath that is, traditional exactly established.
It's more to do with the way you've configured it and presented it. That's the new. It's a new model
it's
rather
the standard,
than new tech,
yeah,
as it were.
It's the standardization.
I just have to. Just got to stop you for 2 seconds.
No problem.
A dog scratching on the door.
No problem.
Honestly, you can make it up.
This episode is sponsored by Fairmont Recruitment, hiring technology professionals across the UK and Europe.
It doesn't like shut doors, so it scratches again. You open the door, it walks in, then walks out again. And if you shut the door, it kind of, Anyway, sorry about that. Just wanted to discuss a particular use case with you, Andy. One that I think we're all extremely familiar with, and maybe I can talk about my own personal experience as a consumer of this rather than as a CIO. And that's work from home. So in some sectors, there's still a very, very high prevalence of 32-bit applications. And most folks are on 64-bit desktops. So if you want to present, one over the other, from a networking point of view, these 32-bit apps also were designed to be on the same network. When was it 10 megabits per second was impressive. I remember token ring networks and all sorts. I'm revealing my age a bit there. But the point is, those applications, they're expecting to be directly connected. So latency is extremely important because if you take something like ODBC, it even the latest version isn't particularly error tolerant. So we found if you got more than sort of north of 40 milliseconds latency, you started to get problems. And then those can be compounded because that latency can then lead to blocking and locking, because the other point is that your 32-bit application is designed for things being dealt with quickly, and therefore blocking and locking wasn't really a factor in the design. Now, obviously, all of this goes away when you don't have a 32-bit app, or if you decide to present it within a terminal service, But there are lots and lots of challenges with a terminal service, because when you add a terminal service, you're adding another desktop. You're adding more surface area to your patching. People don't kind of realize that. And you've got a extremely expensive laptop, and you're just running hardly anything on it. Might as well be a Chromebook, which is, by the way, not a bad thing, but and then obviously the experience sort of wanes a bit. So what I have a firewall appliance at home, which I don't think most consumers would have. I think it's definitely not something my mum could have set up, as it were. And I've mesh Wi-Fi, and when I'm doing anything kind of office related or like this, I'm wired. I have a wired connection directly to to the router. So this is like the Wild West, but it's a really big part of the experience I get, because a large part of my experience is through my ISP down to the VPN and the entry point. So I was just wondering, Andy, if you had a thought on that, because I suppose an ISP is a bit of a connection as a service provider, in the sense that not most people have folks at home with a computer science degree and a unhealthy interest in networking. Go on. What's your thoughts on that, Andy? Because I think that's a massive problem that would be great to be solved somehow.
I think where the interesting part about working from home when it comes to connectivity as a service perspective is, if you're sat there as an organisation and saying, right, we've got 300 staff in an organisation, we've got 2 offices, and we expect staff on site to be circa 50% of our total headcount at any one time. What connectivity as a service will allow you to do is right size that infrastructure for that type of setup, and then obviously as and when you make more decisions around that, i.e. bring everyone back to site, or we're going to acquire, or we're going to close, you can just scale that up and down on a monthly per user subscription service. You're not investing in the hardware. The other adoption that we've seen in light of particularly COVID and working from home is the office environment becomes hot desk, and that then means Wi-Fi throughout, as opposed to perhaps hard wiring and cabling. That is also a clear theme that we saw, which is actually, instead of it needing to be patched in and, always sat next to an Ethernet cable, we just want flooded Wi-Fi across the whole of the site. And again, that's an area where CaaS can just really simplify that.
There's a huge place for Wi-Fi. That genie's out the bottle, and it's extremely convenient for all sorts of applications.
Yeah.
But I am a little bit old school in that I'd much prefer a wired connection. The frequency of Wi-Fi, I think, is similar to the microwave frequency, which means that they both kind of have a relationship with water.
Yeah.
And so there is some articles, and I don't think this is in the flat Earth space. I think this is getting, this is still in the computer science space that says, if you've got damp conditions or it rains, it can actually affect your Wi-Fi connectivity. If you've got yourself a lovely, as a service presented core system, great, provided through a web browser, your sort of your Google setup or all those things, then you've actually got a lot of resilience. You probably wouldn't even notice it. And flooded mesh Wi-Fi makes a lot of sense in that scenario. But again, I'm going back to this persistent problem child of the 32-bit app that just doesn't like any kind of drop-in connectivity, even to the point where on a Windows device, if you get up and hot desk and close your laptop and walk, that can actually break the connection. You wouldn't notice it with a web session because it would just pick up, but that would be a disconnect on your ODBC. So there's I think as much a consideration about your application stack as there is about your networking stack when you put the two together. But if you take the direction of travel that everyone should be going in, everyone should have on their legacy hit list anything that starts with the number 3 and 2 should be up there for replacement, because it really is blocking all of this utility that you're describing. And Andy, also, were you saying about companies reducing their physical footprint, and you're seeing cancellations and you're thinking, okay, this is interesting. What's coming next? Actually, that kind of environment sort of propels you more towards as a service, connectivity as a service, because you're even looking at certain connections between point A and point B that you don't want anymore.
We do quite a bit in legal, for example, where acquisitions, consolidations is quite common, and it's almost a case of, number one, what have they got? We've just acquired that firm. What have they got, and how do we bring that in? Similarly, what does that mean in terms of office strategy and where that's getting to? And I think if you think about the way contractually and commercially all this stuff currently works, you are professional service, project management, 3-year contract for your WAN traditionally, quite rigid. Contract is the contract. If you're cancelling, it's the end of the term. Your LAN is an investment that you sink in over a period of time, similar to your Wi-Fi, and obviously then there is a person cost and people cost that's associated with that. The benefit of CaaS, and where we talk about it being available as a consumption model akin to cloud, it's perhaps less volatile in its consumption peaks and troughs, but the point of that is you would get every single part of that infrastructure we just talked about delivered on a per user per month subscription service. So for example, if you had a site that had 50 users in it and that site needed to decrease to 25 users or 20 users based upon market pressures, business strategy, whatever that will be, your price point just drops by the amount of users you cancel off. Similarly, it will scale. Similarly, if you need to remove it altogether, you can cancel it off. So you kind of are removing, and this is back to the TCO, right? Because, what in the legacy way of doing it, what does that give you in terms of lack of agility and hindrance, ability to move, ability to react quickly to things, particularly when we start to get into the, economic and social climate that we are facing in the next 6 to 12 months, having that ability to completely remove CapEx from the equation, but also be able to move and scale in line with those types of pressures, is fundamentally a key agility advantage.
Yeah, I mean, so in the business case, the legal sector that you mentioned, I would have thought joiners, movers and leavers, which is a massive headache and activity for any law firm. It's a constant flow of people coming in, going out, and moving position. And in the legal space, as with many businesses, particularly with a mover, they've got different access, and there's a lot that goes into that. So the automation in there and being able to plug in, I think, is key. And also, I'm sort of my sixth year, I think, in the legal sector, and I'm just astounded by the number of office moves there are. I mean, that's a big surprise to me.
Yeah.
And they are, and the other sort of odd thing is it always seems like people are slightly in denial about it. Like, this will be the last one, or this is very unusual, but actually they're just all the time. So I think that's key. But when you talk about resilience, I think there's another point that you need to really carefully consider. And that's not really a risk directly related to connectivity as a service. It's more about the CTIO taking a look at the whole portfolio of, in quotes, as a services that you have. Because whilst it's great not to have a big sort of CapEx investment, but there is a place for CapEx investments because it gets depreciated, over the life of the deal, and doesn't have an impact on profit in quite the same way. So that you have to sort of work that out. But the main risk you have is that anything to do with OpEx is drawing from cash. It's cash flow. But it's not just drawing from cash. It also has a pretty amazing consequence if you don't pay. So if you have a business that has this, less than perfect internally organized setup, there are services that will sort of be extremely resilient in terms of being switched off.
Yeah.
They might not be as secure or as up to date, etc., but they won't be switched off. But if you're on as a service, and you have a cash flow challenge, which, let's think about the resilience that everyone's going to need coming up, that can be a problem, because it can be, you're asked, how do we prioritize these, these technology payments? And you say, well, actually, all of these, if any one of these stops, you don't get to XYZ. The network stops, it's pretty much, imagine just imagine your worst scenario, that we need to put another 50p in the meter. So have you thought about that, Andy, for the because I know what you're saying. What maybe what we're saying is the overall cash requirement might be less because of how you're implementing it and what costs you're moving out. So there could still be a net gain. Yeah, but if you do a business case, I've read a lot of business cases that if you add up all the FTE savings, of all the business cases that have been approved, it actually adds up to more people than you employ in your technology team.
Right.
And there's a lot of business case process that goes on where people see it, but they don't execute some of the harder savings. I'm just trying to, because I think this is probably where people are going to be at. That's what they're going to be thinking.
There's a couple
How do I make myself resilient?
There's a couple of interesting points in that. So I think interestingly, connectivity as a service in CaaS, because it's sold and procured as a subscription license, you can actually capitalise that cost. So there is a CapEx option of delivering this service first and foremost. So
that's good to know.
There are scenarios and accounting practices that can help accommodate that. I think ultimately it's kind of like anything with this, particularly in the WAN space, because whatever you do, you are always going to be consuming your WAN on an ongoing service. No one is buying a WAN or buying an internet service up front. It's coming from a service provider, so there are always going to be ongoing costs and charges. That's just a fundamental reality of it. So I think I don't think that's ever a scenario you're going to avoid. What I would say is, with CaaS, you're not locked into a 3-year contract and someone is saying to you, tough, you can't do this, or you can't benchmark because you're already in a service, or you've got something that you signed 5 years, 4 years ago a year ago that's got a long time left on it. So I would argue you will never have more agility than you will with CaaS, and there's some problems you'll never be able to overcome. Go on, sorry.
Andy, having your cake and eat it, So, and this is often the way, you speak about people want a fixed price deal, and you put a fixed price deal together, and they say, "What's this cost?" And you say, "Well, this is the risk I need to put in just in case, some things happen, and then they go, well, he's really done his homework.
Yeah.
Let's go T&M. I don't want a fixed price anymore. I only wanted you to do fixed price so I could see the cost. Now I'm prepared to go T&M. In the same sense, Andy, if I wanted to have a 3-year arrangement with you for a lower unit charge, does your commercial model afford that, or is it basically no? It's no contract, or it's a short-term contract.
I think we're willing to work with. There's always flexibility in terms of commercially what that needs to look like. I think the fundamental approach with CaaS is it's a certain value per user that's based upon the amount of users that you believe will need to use your corporate environment, and that can scale as and when it needs to go. There's fair use. There's all sorts of stuff in there that we can talk through. And if someone was to say, well, actually, I'm going to categorically fix this for a period of 3 years or 5 years, can we do anything different? I mean, ultimately, the when you dive into the commercial and the build of this, CaaS isn't itemized. It's a price per user, and you buy an outcome for that user, which is essentially wall-to-wall internet access. So this is where back to the mindset adoption of the CIO, CTO, IT manager, network manager, whatever it is. When organizations engage in a CaaS discussion, it's not. It's a gig there, it's 100 meg there, there's a primary circuit there, it's a different supplier for the backup, but this is the access point, we're going to need to sell you PS to go and manage it. It is how many sites, how many users, there's your cost per user.
Yeah, I get it.
That is it. So you're not stripping it back to that level. And in terms of that adoption of CaaS, and the way it works from in terms of a pricing perspective, you could have a 1-site network, you could have a 100-site network. Realistically, that couldn't be quoted in minutes because it's a per user. There's obviously software on the back on that underpins that, but you're taking yourself out of that traditional detail conversation because you've basically said we're paying this supplier to do this because it will just work. Obviously, there's SLAs and all sorts that's associated with that, but it takes it really out of the detail.
So that's making me think about scalability.
Yep.
So the first question would be, is your sweet spot or the service that you're providing aimed at the larger company, or can the startup benefit from, is it a price point that a startup could engage in? When I say a startup, I don't mean a PE-backed startup with 5 million quid cash in the bank and 30 people not making a profit for 3 years. I mean like a genuine, 5-10 person organization kind of thing.
Yeah, so I think I would say kind of the real kind of range of client size is probably 50 users to about 1,500 users. That feels like SME, mid-market, small enterprise, probably more SME, mid-market, just based upon the things we talked about before around large IT teams. The bigger the business, the more layers of that you've already got involved as a potential obstacle. So, I think with that, and the same problem exists across all of those organizations, which is, how do I manage my network today? How many people have I got to manage my network today? I'm still dealing with underperforming suppliers typically across that silo stack, and how do I consolidate that and simplify the management of it? And one of the real advantages of the software associated with that is because of the software orchestration and standardization of the deployment. The software's pretty much acting like a 24/7 NOC in-house. It's someone looking at your network 24/7, and if there's a fault, the software diagnoses it, raises a ticket. So there is still a human interaction at some point in that journey, but we're kind of taking the human requirement or dependency, or limiting that, should I say, within that scenario. So that exists, with organizations that are 20, 25 users in the same way it can exist with 500, 1,000 users. It's just a sense of scale.
Okay, well, look, I think we've teed things up nicely to talk about a bit of an overview of how you'd typically adopt this. Sort of the stages you might go through. Now, before we start, maybe we should say that there's an assumption that we've already worked through the business case.
Yeah.
So I'm going to assume, if it's all right with you, Andy, that we've kind of covered the business case. in terms of the, is it a fit for us? Is it the right thing to do? The savings, etc. But obviously, another big part of the business case is implementation. And you've got to know how you're going to adopt it, because then that tells you when your benefits and your disbenefits will flow, and therefore when you're going to start to break even on the business case, and then make your money. So we're still building the business case, as it were, but we're now sort of trying to think about sequencing and timing and considerations, that sort of thing. So Andy, we've put a lot of the commercial and financial elements, risks, etc. The sort of the strategic alignment, all that's in the business case now. But now we're thinking, okay, we've got to think about timing. How risky or how long? What are the challenges of adopting this, so that we know when we can start to actually switch off some costs, switch on some benefits, that sort of thing. So could you kind of talk us through the timeline broadly, and maybe just give us a for instance, we could take one of the SME customers, sweet spot sort of thing, as a sort of an idea.
Absolutely. So I think there's a few things just to consider as part of kind of the global picture at the minute, and that is kit. And I'm sure you have exposure to this in terms of chip shortages, kit availability. It doesn't really matter who you are or what vendor you're working with. So as an example, connectivity as a service from us specifically is it's pretty much all built on Fortinet with Cisco and Extreme options. So we're kind of going after leading vendors of LAN Wi-Fi and CP equipment, and it's just getting hold of kit is a challenge. So you're talking 5 to 6 months at the minute just to get the delivery of the kit. Now obviously, if you think about connectivity as service as a premise, it is essentially treated like a greenfield deployment. So within your CaaS solution, you are getting essentially brand new equipment delivered across every single one of your sites. So that is a complete infrastructure refresh. That is it's kit volume surveys, mapping, all that kind of stuff is done by the supplier of CaaS. So that's a headache removed from the consumer. But you've almost got to work back to that timescale. So historically, as you're probably aware, the bulk of the lead time deploying anything like this was the time it took to get Ethernet circuits delivered, which can be 3-4 months, probably at the best of times. Really,
I've done that. I've done that internationally, and it's a nightmare. And and then when you get there, I've seen people pull out blueprints of buildings, of skyscrapers, literally to try and work out what the ducting route will be to get to the nth floor.
It's a minefield.
It's really hands-on, detailed stuff.
It's a minefield, and that's the world I've lived over a decade. In terms of dealing with the ISPs, the tail providers. So you always had that Ethernet consideration around your lead times, but actually now kit is probably surpassing that. So kit availability, and to be frank, it's probably not going to get any easier. It's probably going to be worse first. I think realistically, in the next 6 to 12 months, you're going to be looking at a similar kind of cycle. And so I think really you've got to take a step back and say, actually, what is the end state and the end goal for this? Is there dependencies? Is it a site move? Is there contracts with existing suppliers that are potentially going to end? Is the kit that's end of life? There's a whole bunch of compelling events that put a line in the sand that you need to work back.
What it says, Andy, is it says to me that this is very much a strategic move.
Yeah,
it's not we have a conversation on Wednesday and on Thursday we're switched on.
Yeah,
this is part of a. If you took your so we're doing an event coming up, which is a 100-day plan.
Okay.
And it's pitched at either you've just started a new role in a business technology leadership role, so it is literally your first 100 days.
Yeah.
But it can also be taken as the first 100 days of your strategy of a particular phase, that sort of thing. So with that sort of lead time, I would say it is in the strategic space. But I think you're probably, I don't want to steal your thunder, but I'm guessing there's still a lot you can do in the design and planning, which is going to use up a lot of those months in any case. So it might be ultimately the longest thing you wait for, but actually sorting out where you're starting from and everything else, and existing contracts, and any security
that comes as part
all
of
that.
your TCO. So if you understand that from your TCO perspective, you've already got a sense of I've got this. I've got this in terms of cost to third parties, and I've got this in terms of cost to people. That's where I'm at.
Yes.
I've got this that saves me X, Y, and Z, and gives me a bunch of agility benefits and takes away my management headaches. So I think what I would say is fundamentally, from a deployment perspective, you are talking about installing a WAN. You're talking about refreshing equipment across your sites. It's not something that CTOs, CIOs, won't have been through before. The difference with this is it is the complete consolidation when we're delivering the kit as part of the solution. It's the complete consolidation of that with one provider. Now, obviously, because of that, yes, it's potentially bigger in its scale, but there's a standardization around how that's going to be delivered, managed, and deployed, that you would be basically, if you were doing it separately, you'd be running three different. A prime example, I digress slightly, John, but you talk about public sector. So CCS, Cloud Commercial Service, in terms of the tender framework.
Yeah.
There's three lots: WAN, LAN, and Wi-Fi. So if a public sector organisation wanted to consume CaaS today, in theory, they're bidding three different tenders for one outcome. So, that's a scenario that we're talking about changing. And in some instances, the organisations we work with, they're writing waivers.
It's a service revolution.
Yeah.
Revolution might be a little bit strong word, but definitely it's a disruptive way of delivering the service, but it's using established technology. But due to your scale, you are able to, to get not bleeding edge, but the edge, bleeding edge -2. So it's stable, but you can patch it because you've got the scale, you've got the resources
and the
to
software,
do that.
The software, is a really key part of that. And we're very lucky in that we've deployed this software. It's our software in terms of what sits on top of connectivity as a service, and that is the software that someone within an organisation is going in. As I said before, it's the software that diagnoses faults on the network, raises tickets on behalf. It's software that provides drop down for changes. As there's no free text field.
That's effectively. That's your portal. That's
Correct.
your bit of IP you've
Correct.
developed, and it's I can log in and get the view of my account. It's basically the customer portal, and dare say you've probably got some supplier elements to it, but it's the classic. That is, in my stricter sense of the definition, that is your digital transformation, because it's classically at the boundary between you and your customer or your supply chain.
Yeah.
And it's hooking into everything underneath it. Sustainability. So the significant cost of a data center has always been power.
Yeah.
I just dread to think what that's, the next year or so. It's, anyone who's managed to land a fixed price, on the cost of...
In my previous company, John, we used to run one, so we owned a data center. So
exactly what I mean,
exactly,
yeah. So it's a huge cost. So there's obviously a cost element to it, but there's also sustainability, and you've got as a profession, technologists use a lot of electricity, and therefore we have a footprint. Is there anything that you guys do in that space? Is there anything that you're planning to do, from your portal point of view, that gives me a view of whether you're fossil based or just that whole sustainability element? Is that something you guys are looking into? Because I think it's becoming increasingly an important element.
I think it's something for us to consider. I think it's how we're able to present how we're doing that in a manner that kind of builds confidence and transparency with the customer. I think if you take the concept of CaaS and kind of how what that actually means, as an example, so we talked about infrastructure. So an organisation that may have invested in a bunch of kit 3-4 years ago that still sat there and still has a balance sheet value. As part of the transition to CaaS, an option that we do in particular is, we can actually buy that kit back off them for the current balance sheet value as part of the service. So we are deploying brand new infrastructure, but we are taking that kit away to then either recycle or use as part of the deployments as part of our bigger group. So it's an eye on us trying to do something. I think the wider kind of sustainability part around fuel and whatnot is something that we're thinking about, but it's an area we would probably need to develop a bit further.
Yeah, and I think it is a really sort of a new category at this level. Again, referring back to the cloud strategy episode, there was talk of having some APIs whereby, let's say you've got 2 or 3 cloud providers, and you have got an element of workload that's portable. There isn't a lot, but let's just say you have. You'd be able to work out where their power was coming from, and therefore send more workload to the, to the sustainable power. It starts to become a thing, definitely. And then that starts to drive behaviour, because greener energy then becomes more popular. But of course, that's going to drive. It'll all sort of work itself out with prices. But I think everyone's really sort of thinking very seriously about what we can do in that space. We've sort of discussed a business case. We've talked about where it would apply. We've talked about adoption, the process you'd go through to get this up and running. Just, top of your mind, the sort of things that you'd want the folks watching this who are really interested in moving to connectivity as a service. What are the kind of the takeaways that you'd leave them with in terms of just having something to, if anyone is going to write anything down, maybe they take some notes now. What would be your kind of summary view?
I think I would probably say, and this is part of the kind of deep dive in the conversations we'd have with customers and potential customers, which is kind of just fully understanding the impact that this has on the business today, right? So I think, we've talked a lot about what impact the day-to-day management of a network and the suppliers or multi-vendors of that network has, and how efficient that looks like, and what time is that taking away, or could be taking away from making your beer taste better, as we kind of talked about before, which is, really, is that the skill set? Have you got the right skills? And is there another way to do that? Because when you look at this from a TCO perspective, 99 times out of 100, CaaS will save a business on TCO. So, that we fundamentally will offer them a reduction in the total cost of ownership of this infrastructure and this service. It's more where they are as a business in terms of being able to adopt that. So, as a similar takeaway, if you've got an organisation that is soon to embark on a kit refresh or a site move, or the types of things where they would typically go down the rabbit hole of the legacy way of thinking, that would be a good time to say, well, actually, what would it look like if we went down connectivity as a service? And I'd also say ask your staff, because we see it day in, day out, where there are IT teams who are they are bending over backwards to keep the lights on from a connectivity perspective, and actually that's taking them away from things that would be considered more strategic for their business.
And Andy, just on that point quickly, so the size of company you describe, often some of the individuals that are involved in networking, it's not the only thing they do. They might be infrastructure engineers rather than 100%. Just networking engineers. And so I've had teams set up in the past for doing business technology automation. So a business technology automation team isn't just someone who can, code, replace whatever's being done with code. It normally has to transverse infrastructure. There's all sorts of other considerations. So one of the ways this slots into creative automation is those individuals that are just spending all their time keeping the lights on, they're able to move into that automation role. So that gives you a double benefit, because obviously there is the actual benefit we've been describing, but then you've got being able to move those resources into tactical automation, which can make a massive difference. Manual processes, highly repetitive processes in your core ERP or case management system can be transformed with some simple automation, but you do need a cross-functional team. And those infrastructure engineers that also understand, they understand how everything connects. They're really valuable. So I think I don't want people to come away to say there's there's a number of ways that you can transform that cost and set that business case on fire. And remember, this is definitely in the as with all networking, there are lead times involved, so it needs to be part of a strategy, not part of a Andy, can you get this done by next week, please? Yes. Andy's good, but he can't control the laws of physics. Exactly. Brilliant. Okay, so Andy, thank you very much, and I really appreciate your time.
Cheers.
My name is Malcom and I'm wondering when everything as a service will become available. One single price per user per month for absolutely everything. It's probably closer than we think. CTIO 101. Business Technology Simplified and Shared. Subscribe now. Sponsored by Fairmont Recruitment, hiring technology professionals across the UK and Europe.